You are listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Welcome back to I Am Refocused Radio. Once again, we are here today. Today, we have another show lineup for you all. We have a special guest, Dr. Joe Lex. He is going to share with us about his book, All Bones Considered. And I just want to say, he was nice enough to allow me to do this episode with y'all because, you know, lives get hectic sometimes. Lives get busy. But you know what? There's no excuse because we all have to play that role. So first and foremost, I just want to say to you, Dr. Joe, thank you for spending some time with us today. Your background, you're not just author, you're a retired emergency medicine physician, but you're in the podcast world too, if I believe that is correct. But I just want to say, I'm excited to have a fellow podcaster on the show. You know what you're doing, and I just want to say, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing fine. And if you had anything at all to do with Philadelphia history, I'd have you on my podcast. My podcast is all about Philadelphia history. So,
well, if you can, for our audience, plug where they can find that and how often can they hear you?
Same name. It's All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories. That is the podcast that comes out at the first of the month. In fact, the one that comes out tomorrow, I actually let out a few days early because of the snowstorm. But it's for Black History Month. 4 significant Black folks who are buried at Laurel Hill West. The middle of the month, I put another podcast out called Biographical Bites from Bala, Laurel Hill West Stories. That's a smaller thing. That concentrates usually on one person or one specific topic. Like the one scheduled for Black History Month is Walter Livingston. He was the premier African-American architect in Philadelphia after World War II. And it gives me a chance not only to talk about individuals, it gives me a chance to talk about things like, what does it mean to be a Black architect from the perspective of a white person? You know, what would American architecture look like if we hadn't concentrated so much on European forms and accepted more of the Asian and the African forms? Because those forms are totally different. So that's the sort of thing I do in the podcast. I really try to get in one topic and narrow down on it and then talk about the person. There are some podcasts where I might not actually mention the name of the person until I'm 15 or 20 minutes into the podcast because I'm building up to that point. Like one of the people I talk about tomorrow, Julia Kamai. She was a Liberian immigrant. She was not an Americo-Liberian. She was a native Liberian. She was married to the son of one of the tribal princes. And she escaped during the Liberian Revolution in 1979, set up a life here in the United States. Her husband became the person that all of the Liberian emigres, he was their contact point in the United States. So it's just fascinating, absolutely fascinating. These people that nobody's ever heard of have done such incredible things. It's absolutely mind-blowing.
I appreciate you sharing that with us. And that's why we have people like you on the show, because it's so interesting when you understand the concept of storytelling. This is something that happens since the beginning of time. I mean, what I'm doing right now, what you do on your show, what you do with your book, it is a lot of stories being told. We shed light on things that people either ignore or they never knew existed. And that's my mission personally doing the show, is to highlight people like yourself who are doing great work and in ways of bringing communities together. You're
highlighting the people who are doing those things now. I'm highlighting the people that were doing that stuff 20 years ago, 120 years ago, even 220 years ago. But you're right. Our goals are the same. Let's get good stories. Let's get good news out there about people and tell all of the good things that people have done. One of the women who's in the book, now Julia Kamai is not in the book because I just studied her recently. One of the women in the book is a woman, well, some of them you might know. Civil rights leader C. Dolores Tucker, does that name mean anything? She was Secretary of State of Pennsylvania for several years. She got into a battle with rap artists in the 90s when all the misogynistic hip-hop lyrics started coming out. And since her last name was Tucker, the rap artist had a field day in writing songs about her, as you can imagine. But C. Dolores Tucker is buried in a very interesting part of the cemetery, because she's literally right across the street from Grover Washington Jr., and just about 100 feet down is Teddy Pendergrass and Billy Paul. But it's not, that makes it sound like it's a black section of the cemetery. It's not. Mama Dietz is there, a woman who you ever heard of Dietz and Watson Lunch Meat? She was the CEO of Dietz and Watson. There's a guy named Slab Jackson who was one of the first professional football players. So it's a nice, I guess I'll call it what it is. It's an integrated neighborhood, the way it's supposed to be. I gave a specific tour about this section of Philadelphia, of this section of the cemetery, the Franconia section, because it's such a good mix of millionaires and politicians and business people and lawyers and entertainers. It's a terrific tour, and a bunch of those people made it into the book also.
When you think about these stories inside the book, what made, if you can pick two women, what would you say made you stop and say, wow, how does everybody not know about this story?
Oh my goodness. Probably, if you want me to talk about black women, I'll talk about Marion Stokes. Marion was she eventually became a card-carrying communist. She was born in the 30s. She was brilliant. She was very smart. She went to girls' high school. She became an archivist in the library when she graduated from high school, but her politics got in the way. She was very left-wing, and she actually became a card-carrying communist. She and her second husband tried to defect to Cuba, but their paperwork never came through, so they sheepishly came back to Philadelphia. What Marion did was she got involved in public television, the Sunday morning desert of public television back in the 70s and 80s. And a guy from Chestnut Hill, which is really, really the upper strata of Philadelphia, took a shine to Marion and married her. He left his wife and his 5 kids, and he married Marion. And they spent the next 40 years together. But with access to his money, she went out and she fell in love with Steve Jobs. And she bought everything that came out from Apple. She started buying Apple stock when it was $7 a share. And she told all of her friends to do the same. And anybody who paid attention to her got quite wealthy from it. So she started buying videotape machines and taping all of the news shows on television. And after a time, she had 7 videotape machines going simultaneously to record all of the news. The days were built around changing tapes. If they went out to dinner, they had to hurry up so they could get back and change the tapes. When she died, there were more than 700,000 hours of videotape that she had recorded that went to archive.com or to archives.org, archive.org, where they are sorting through it. And if you go to archive.org now, you can find the Marion Stokes collection. They're starting to put a lot of this stuff up. But she archived stuff that nobody else had. It wasn't until after that radio TV stations started recording their own stuff. She saved a huge chunk of history. I think she deserves to be better remembered. I really do. Because everybody thought she was crazy, but there's that fine line between crazy and genius sometimes. And she passed over it. I think she was on the genius side. She knew exactly what she was doing. So Marion was one who inspired me. You want another woman? I'm going to jump out of Black History and I'll go to Women's History Month and tell you about a woman named, are you ready for this? Amy Ernesta Drinker Bullet Bow Barlow, but everybody knew her as Commando Mary. Okay? Very wealthy Quaker family. Well, not wealthy, but a very well-established Quaker family, the Drinkers. The Drinkers have been around in this country since before the Revolution. In fact, when Benjamin Franklin was our ambassador to France, somebody said, "How long do Americans live?" And Ben Franklin said, "I'll let you know when old Drinker dies." So just to give the idea that the Drinkers have been here for a long time. Anyway, she came from that line. She was one of 6 children. Her oldest brother, Harry, was a constitutional lawyer, one of the top lawyers in the United States, argued before the Supreme Court many times. And he's the guy who rescued the Von Trapp family when they came to the United States and put them up, the Sound of Music crew. Next brother was Philip. He invented the iron lung. Next brother was Cecil. Cecil started the School of Public Health at Harvard and investigated the radium girls. And her little sister was Kitty, and Kitty wrote 6 books that were Book of the Month Club choices. So this is a talented family. Ernesta was the wild child. She was absolutely gorgeous. Her aunt, her mother's sister, was the portrait painter Cecilia Beaux. If you know anything about American art, Cecilia Beaux and John Singer Sargent were the 2 premier portrait painters of the 19th century. Sargent usually did the men. Cecilia Beaux usually did the women. Cecilia Beaux started painting Ernesta when Ernesta was 2 years old, and she painted her 7 times during her life because she was such a beautiful woman. Ernesta turned down 50 marriage proposals before she was 21 years old. Finally, she married Bill Bullitt, William Bullitt. He was, at that time, he was a newspaper reporter. Later, he was our ambassador to Russia. That's a whole different story. But she was in Russia during the Great War, keeping a diary, and the diary was published afterwards because her husband's notes were all confiscated, but they didn't confiscate her diary. So that was where the information came from about inner workings of the German Empire during the war. She got involved. She became a travel writer. She divorced Billy Bullitt. She had an affair with Rockwell Kent, the artist. Eventually, what happened during World War II was she wanted to do something for the war effort, and she decided she wanted to do a radio show that encouraged women to get involved in the war effort. And she had this very distinctive, proper, even though she's a Philadelphian, she had a very distinctive Boston accent that she had adopted. And everybody thought they would make fun of her. So they nicknamed her Commando Mary. And she just let it roll right off her. She said, sure, fine, whatever. And she did her show, and it became very, very popular. People really loved to hear her on the radio and trying to get women involved in the war effort. So she did that during the war. That's how she got the name Commando Mary. She married an opera composer. They had music salons in New York for years. On Wednesday evening, you could go to their apartment, and the Juilliard String Quartet might be playing that night, or Grace Bumbry might be singing that night. And eventually they ran out of money, and they moved back to Philadelphia, and they're both buried at Laurel Hill West, the husband and the wife. But the story is just amazing, and nobody's ever heard of this woman, Commando Mary. How could you not enjoy somebody named Commando Mary? So those are the types of women that I have kind of discovered in the process of doing the research.
And with your research, when you look at culture today, sometimes we stop listening to the past. We don't want to bother about looking up history and understanding what happened back then. What do you believe culture today loses when they do that, when they stop listening to the past?
They make the same mistakes. They don't realize it's like, I was a physician for many years, and I realized the only thing that gets published in journals is positive studies. We don't know how many people are going to try the same experiment and fail because those studies don't get published. History, we could look at the past. We can see what was done in the past, and we can see what happens when we move in that direction. And it's frustrating to see history being pulled apart right now the way it is, because I'm old enough to know what happened, to read, having read about what happened in the 1930s and 40s. I'm old enough to remember the Red Scare in the 50s, definitely. I remember walking to school, remembering where the fallout shelters were, because we just knew the bombs were going to fall any minute. I'm part of that generation that would hide under the desk once a week and practice for the nuclear fallout that was going to have. If we don't know these things, we're going to repeat them. And you're not going to have people like me around that much longer. Each generation. That's why we have to listen to the Holocaust survivors. The few that are left, we have to listen to them, because that's the way we know the story. That's the way we're not going to do that again. No, we cannot let that happen again. And I'm afraid that's part of what's happening with history right now, is people are ignorant of the way things were in the past. I know it's true, again, from my profession. I'm a retired professor of emergency medicine. Watching what Robert Kennedy, if I can mention this, but watching what Robert Kennedy has done to the Department of Health is horrifying. The whole medical community is absolutely terrified of what's coming in the future. Once these, are we going to see polio again? Maybe not in my lifetime. I'll bet you we do in your lifetime, though. I'll bet you polio makes a comeback.
Wow.
We're not going to. They're taking away the things that have worked, and I can't figure out why. I don't know why.
Very interesting. Once again, let's on Refocused Radio, watching us online, talking to our guest today, Dr. Joe Lex. My next question to follow up on what we're talking about is, when you think about all the research that you've done with putting this book together, what was the hardest part of turning that amount of research into something that is not just informative, but also moving?
Also moving? Assembling, all right. As an academic, you learn to take something small and expand on it. So I retired in 2016. I'd spent 49 years in emergency medicine. I was a medic in Vietnam. I was a nurse. I did a lot of different things. And I wanted to get away from that, but I'd gotten used to the research and the teaching. So when I went on a tour at Laurel Hill Cemetery, a few months after I retired, they mentioned they were looking for new guides. I said, that sounds exactly what I want to do. Now, they have some research material available, but they encourage you to do your own original research. And that's what I started to do. And I kept picking up new people that nobody else had covered before, especially when we got to start doing research at Laurel Hill West, because those people had not been picked over. I found a bunch of people at Laurel Hill West that nobody had ever covered before. And I did the podcast, All Bones Considered, Laurel Hill Stories. I started that, I guess, about 7 years ago now. More than 85,000 downloads. It was recently voted Best Philadelphia History Podcast. And I kept getting more scripts for the podcast. And before you knew it, I had a couple of hundred scripts. And then I started the second podcast, and I got more scripts. I had 300 or 400 scripts that I thought, well, maybe I can get a book out of this. And that's sort of how I came to it. I decided that I would do the women first because I thought they were more interesting. I had fewer women than men, obviously. I only had about 70 women at the time, but I was able to get the 52 out of it. But the women are more interesting because they had to be. There weren't that many opportunities available to them until the mid-19th century. I mean, teacher and writer was about it, as far as honorable professions for women. And women were not writing their own histories until the 19th century. So anything you read about women before 1850 is probably not written from a woman's perspective. Now, obviously, I can't write things from a woman's perspective either, but I can try to interpret. So that's what I try to do. I mean, I don't. I admit I'm looking at this stuff from the perspective of a 78-year-old white guy who's had a pretty decent life, and trying to understand what other people have been through is sometimes challenging.
When you think about separating myth, rumor, in real life, when you're researching someone over 100 plus years ago, what was some of the things that you found out during that process?
Most of the people that I'm investigating don't have mythology associated with them. I mean, yes, there are some stories that have been told over time. For many years, we told the story of Charles Thompson, who was the Secretary of the Continental Congress for the entire time of the Continental Congress. I mean, he was literally the guy who knew where all the bodies were buried. He signed the first copy of the Declaration of Independence, but since he wasn't a representative from one of the colonies, he didn't sign the official one. Anyway, Charles Thompson was, where was I going with this? I lost my train on that. What was the question you started to ask on that?
Oh, it's no worries. When you think about separating...
myth. Yeah. That's right. That's right. For many years, it was thought that the cemetery had grave robbed Charles Thompson. When Charles Thompson died, he was buried at the family plot in Harriton, which is 20 miles outside of Philadelphia. And for many years, people thought that we'd literally gone out there and grabbed the body and brought it back. Paperwork exists that shows that is not the case, but that is a myth that will not die. There are a couple of other myths that I've heard perpetrated also, that when I hear them, I stamp them out. I say, no, that doesn't match up with the facts. But there wasn't that much mythology to cut through. It's more fun just finding interesting facts. Like, all right, when you think of, for instance, battlefield and bombers, these are battlefield surgeons during the Civil War, during the American Civil War. You think of what? Amputations. Less than 10% of the physicians were allowed to amputate. It's little things like that I try to stick in to clarify things that people might have confused along the way. I don't know if that answers your question.
No, that's good. My next question is, you also, with this book project, you have proceeds that support some great work. If you can, for our audience, let us know, what is that all about, and how can they get involved if they ever thought that they might want to get involved?
Sure. I wrote the book as a gift to a group called Friends of Laurel Hill Cemetery. I was going to leave the money in my will. I said, wait a minute, no, let me do something that'll live on after me. So I wrote the book, and they have the rights to it. They get all of the money from the book. It's my gift to them. And it's available at Amazon. It's available at Barnes & Noble. It's available from the bookshop. Laurel Hill East Cemetery has a gift shop. So, yes, there's an online gift shop. You can go buy morbid-looking things from there, including the book. LaurelHillPHL.com. The book, again, is All Bones Considered Laurel Hill, or 52 Laurel Hill Women. The podcast is All Bones Considered Laurel Hill Stories. That you can get at Apple Podcasts, at Spotify, Podbean, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And they are history stories about people buried at the cemeteries.
Once again, this is I Am Refocused Radio, and watching this online, talking to our guest today, Dr. Joe Lex. I want to say, not only did time go by so fast, but in our closing minute here, give young people, if you will, a word to the wise. I mean, you're a person who has lived your life. What are some of the things that you learned in your life that you would want to pass down to young people and say, hey, if you do this, you might be okay?
Well, I actually give a lecture on that, and you don't want to hear the whole, plus I'd have to dust it off. I haven't given that lecture since I retired. But I literally used to give a lecture called An Old Fogey Gives Advice, 45 years of experience. A couple of things I pointed out is as long as people are in training, they have to stay inside the box. They have to stay in the envelope. As soon as they're able to start making decisions on their own, and they're willing to suffer the consequences, they got to start working outside the box because there's very little innovation. This is my problem with AI. I mean, I use AI sparingly. For illustrations, I don't use it at all. I hate it. But I do use it sparingly because it makes it too easy, for one thing. But what is happening is AI is gathering all of this information, these large language models, and they're distilling it into a common language that is shaving off the rough edges. And that's where all the excitement is. You and I both know that. The excitement is at the rough edges. It's not inside. But people can't get outside the box until they're in a position where they can afford to be outside the box. But that's where all the innovation is. That's where all the good stuff is going to happen. What other advice to give people? I mean, there's some stuff that is just incredibly obvious, but I don't know if it's, we always told the residents when you go out and practice, live like a resident for your first 2 years. Even though you're making 5 times as much money as you were making before, live exactly the way you were living for the last 2 years, or for the first 2 years. Let that money build up, and then that's when you can start going out and buying stuff and doing all the good stuff. What other advice? I mean, the personal advice I should give is like, you got to go hiking in Europe at least once in your life. It's a truly incredible experience. Go hiking through Germany or Italy, or take part of the Camino. But that to me is a vacation. Sitting on a beach or going on an ocean liner would drive me crazy. But for 10 years, my wife and I hiked 6 days a year in Europe, and it was awesome. And I highly recommend it for anybody who wants to have an unusual vacation.
Appreciate you sharing that with us, and I want to emphasize what you said earlier about AI and the rough edges. I mean, They would say, I mean, come on, some of the best parts of life are the rough parts. So
Absolutely.
People get too filtered, if you will. And
exactly. Life is not meant to be totally smooth. There are going to be bumps. There are going to be rough edges along the way. If you're living a smooth life, it's not terribly exciting. It's not terribly challenging either. I mean, there's got to be a challenge to life.
Once again, listen, I Am Refocused Radio, watching us online, talking to our special guest today, Dr. Joe Lex. Like always, want to say thank you for your time.
Shemaiah, thank you very much.